Good morning. My name is Milton Kane. I've decided to put my hand up to challenge the position of Lord Mayor of Newcastle in this 2024 Newcastle City Council election. One of the crises we have in this particular city at this point of time is we actually have a large number of people who are homeless. So hence, front and centre, we need to consider the fact that we actually need to do something to resolve something of the housing crisis facing this city. Everybody from every political leader, from the Prime Minister down to the local councillor, will talk about affordable housing. And yet, in all that they think, do and say in regard to this, they do not come up with a number, a dollar value on what affordable housing is. There is a scheme that operates in and around most places, where, for example, if a developer comes into town and they decide to build a bunch of units, let's presume that they are going to build 50 units. Providing that 15% of those units, that is, out of the 58 units, are priced at 10% below the price of the rest of those units, that development property is deemed to be an affordable housing development. And there are certain financial advantages to the developer because they've gone down that track. Now, the developer may choose to place the rent for the premium places at $1,000 or more a week, meaning that only $900 would be the price needed for those 10% less. $900 a week is not affordable housing for those people who have difficulty in finding housing. So the whole scenario on which these government programs are based are pointless and do not achieve anything to deal with the homelessness of people in this country. People are homeless because they cannot afford housing. That's as simple as that, really. Or, alternatively, there's none available. And there are a number of issues which have actually caused us to be where we are today. I'd like to go back into history at this present time and have a look at what has happened over the decades. In 1970, if you were to buy a home in New South Wales, you would be paying, on average, $18,700. By 1980, the price had increased to $76,500. By 1990, it had risen to $184,600. By 2000, it had gone up to $312,000. By 2010, $575,900. By 2020, $1,211,500. And in July 2024, the average price of housing in New South Wales was deemed to be $1,473.38. We have a crisis. In 1970, to buy a home on average wages you would need to put into that home, if you input the entirety of your income before tax, 4.5 times. In other words, 4.5 years. Your total income going to the house, not with taking tax out, would pay for the house. In 2020, that has increased to over 10 times. One thing that I would like to tell you about is a particular property. This property is in Bondi. I know it's a desired suburb from time to time, but anyway, in June 2023, this particular property in Bondi was available for rent at $1,095 per week. And yet in 1979, this very same property was advertised at rent and rented at $43 per week. And if we inflated that $43 via the inflation rate, not by the increase in house prices, but by the inflation rate, that would have been, at the time in June 2023, $245. When we consider that rent at $245 compared to how much it was rented in June 2023, that is a factor of 4.467 times. We can see the problem in those numbers. But how did we get there? That's always a problem, how we get to these places. Well, in Australia, unlike many parts of the world, anybody is entitled to buy real estate here. I know people who wanted to help people in other parts of the world, in Southeast Asia, in Thailand and other such places, and they can invest money they like, but they can only have ownership up to 49%. So an Australian charity may choose to buy some land in Thailand for some particular reason, whether it be housing for people with disadvantages or elderly or whatever. They may supply all of the money, but they must find some local people who will hold the title deed to 51%. Very important that their money can be donated to these others so that they can own at least 51% of the property. But anybody in the world can own 100% of Australian property. And a lot of our property is owned overseas. That can be changed by an act of federal parliament. They don't want to do that for some reason. Not too sure why. I think the people of Australia say it's about time we did do that. That would cause the price of housing to reduce because many of these places which are owned by people overseas are often not available to be rented. They're kept for various reasons, and I don't want to go into all of that. The other side of the problem we have is that social circumstances have changed over the years. Families were made up of a number of individuals. You would have families which would have a husband, a wife, and a number of children. You would also have, at times, and particularly in some communities, you would have the grandparents and parents living with their children who also were creating their own families. So you had those circumstances. Well, these days people want to separate and be in their own place. Nothing wrong with that at all, except it may mean we need a lot more housing. And so we need to make sure that we make that possible, make it available. We also have the circumstances where relationships tend to be more temporary today than they have historically been. There's always been divorce around. There has always been people who have, lived together under various circumstances, whether it be intimate or not. There have been people living like that, always. But the proportion has increased somewhat. So a lot more people live and want to have their own place, as it were. And so when we look at all of those circumstances together, we find we need to have a lot more housing per person in the population. So as a percentage of population, you need more housing. And we can see that the trend over the years has not, as a population trend and to the number of housing we have, that relationship has not increased at the rate to reflect the changed social circumstances, and hence there was always going to be a shortage of housing because of those decisions being made. Of course, public housing was one of the things that happened a lot more in the past than it does at present time. And of course, various governments had different schemes to update their housing. So what you would do, they would build public housing, they would rent it out to people for several years, and they would then want to move that housing on. And how often that housing was moved on is if a person had remained renting a place for 10 years or so or more, that some of that rent money would be able to go towards the purchase of that house, and so then would be able to use that. They would be able to have their house, and they'd be able to use some of that money there that they were going to get for that house. They could use that to actually replace the housing with new housing. They stopped doing that. Governments have stopped to do. They've decided they don't want to do that. I think there's something we need to work on. We all should remember the old song about my old man was a dustman and he lived in a council flat. Nothing wrong with councils actually doing things to actually establish council housing. And when I consider the fact that in this city alone of Newcastle, in one particular location, I understand that there is approximately 50 places which are boarded up today, not available for rent, because there needs to be work done via the Department of Housing. No pressure is put upon the Department of Housing to actually do anything about it. Well, if those places were fixed in that single location, that would mean 50 more people would be able to be in housing. And yet they are not the only ones, because scattered throughout the community in other places where there are social housing, there are also other vacant blocks, vacant housing as well. And we need to look seriously at how long it takes for the Department of Housing to bring these houses back onto line so they can be rented again. They need to be done quickly and urgently. And if the state government, through its Department of Housing, is unable to get these things done quickly, then I believe we as a council should be requesting of the government that the council manage the rehabilitation of these houses when they become vacant, so they can be back online very quickly. Also, apart from that, we have the Lord Mayor, current Lord Mayor of Newcastle, who wants to invest $10 million to the Newcastle Baths so that she can commercialise the place. For whatever reason, I do not see a community out outcry, please commercialise it. In fact, I see the very opposite. The commercialisation of the Newcastle bath is something that is strenuously opposed by most people in Newcastle, and it should not go ahead. And if the Lord Mayor has found funds of $10 million to do something with and wants to know what she can do with it, we can go and use that for utilising to construct housing, which the council can own and rent out to people. And yet when we're on this particular subject, I think as we go over the Stockton Bridge and we start to head towards Stockton, there is the old buildings there of what has been the mental institution, all vacant. Those buildings are quite good. They would not take a lot of effort to refurbish them. Some of those buildings are dormitory style. That may suit certain types of people. Some of that housing is different to that as well, and that can be actually divided up into apartments and other such things. Imagine what $10 million would do there. It would make a huge improvement. I know that we may consider that's not really what we want to do with that in the long term. Maybe it's something better. But currently it is vacant and we have people without a place to lay their head. We need to fix that problem. Whether it be temporary or not, we need to fix it. That temporary housing, at least there, would be a good step in the right direction. Out in my way, we have a very significant development occurring out there. A lot of houses. But I asked myself the question about affordability. I don't believe these places will come on the market with a completed home for a price much below, if they are below, $800,000 a piece. You see, the way the development is occurring, they're going to be expensive homes. Nothing wrong with that, except that we do have a need at this present time for people who do not have the funds for such housing. And we need to do what we can to bring those prices down. Some of the situations that we have done over the years that have increased prices of housing, particularly the price of rent, is what the council has done. Under this particular Lord Mayor that we have at his present point of time in Newcastle, we have seen on virtually every occasion, every time you can have an increase in rates, we have gone to the maximum. And at times, they put up an argument to go above the maximum. The Lord Mayor prides herself in how big the budget is now compared to when she took over office. The council does not generate money by various investments as such. It obtains its money by charges. And if the council has seen a massive increase of the amount of money coming in, dare I suggest to you there have been excessive charges to the residents in Newcastle. And those charges would need to be passed on in cost of housing, whether it be via rent or future prices of selling of houses. We need to work on that one. The other side of it is to build or construct a house. There are charges which are associated with that. Sure, council services, they need to be paid for, and so if you want to develop a property, you should obviously pay for that to happen. But councils these days are outsourcing all of this stuff. And so for a development application to go through. You've got all this outsourcing. I have been through that to try and repair a building damaged in another council area. And so far it has cost me over $13,500. Fortunately, at this stage, I can almost see the end where I can actually start doing some work. It's taken a long time and a lot of money. A lot more money than it should have, because nothing is checked internally anymore. It's all external. And as I said last week at the Lord Mayor Candidates Forum, if you outsource all of your work, then you don't need the staff. I don't want to outsource the work. I need the staff. I need the staff capable of making decisions to say, yes, you can do this, or no, you can't. We need to do that. And we need to do it right. Then, of course, the state government, we must put pressure on the state government to get rid of half the charges which are there. Obviously, as I've mentioned, the national government, we actually have to stop the number of people who are able to own property. We also need to be careful on what immigration level we permit in this country, because we shouldn't be inviting people to come here if we don't have a place for them to sleep. It's as simple as that. If you want to bring people in, and I'm not objecting to bringing people in, but I am objecting to bringing people in when we have no place for them to sleep. We must supply housing for them. So I ask, if the government wants to see more people come into this country, the national government wants to see that, where is the money to build the houses, to house them? We cannot keep forcing the price up, because, as I have said, the price of housing is really about a free market, well, sort of free market. There's a lot of government involvement that makes it not so free, but a free market decision. But we have to make available more housing. We need to be careful where we do it and how we do it. We don't want to destroy the environment. We need our environment to be there. We need the natural environment. We need our farming communities. We need them to produce the food for us. We need all of those things. And so we need to be careful on how we expand our housing. We also need to make sure that people have got a place to work and all those things. And so we've got to stop outsourcing our industry. We need to be producing in this country, which will help to sustain things. During COVID, a whole bunch of things happened. A lot of poor decisions were made. And they caused the cost of building materials to soar through the roof. And that also is something that has to be brought under control. Because all of the things that add to the cost of housing to make it blow out to the levels that it has got to stop. There will be a point of time when only the extremely wealthy will be able to have housing in this country, unless we take action, and take action now. And I want to start that at council level and argue the case through all sources of government to actually put a lid on these expenses. Are you with me on this? Do you know somebody who cannot get a home of their own? My work as a taxi driver, I carry people from place to place, and I ask them the question, as I asked the question of a young lady the other night. I asked her whether she thought she'd ever be able to own a home. She said no. There would have to be so many changes, she can't see it happening. She can't envisage ever owning a home. And that is a very sad tale. A very sad tale in this country. We need to do things better. We need to do them right. I refer back to one of the most significant things of what political leadership should be. And I take my marching orders about political leadership from a very old text from Deuteronomy in the Bible, where it tells me that leadership, as I read carefully through that, it shows what it is. It needs to be servant leadership. Those people who are wealthy, those people who have the things they need, they don't need somebody to help them along the way. But servant leadership means the person that goes out and finds those ones that are struggling for whatever the circumstances or reason, and tries to help those people to get together and to be able to do the things they need to do to be able to be self-sustaining. This is not about trying to be socialistic, but it's to have a social conscience. You see, every political system, no matter how good or bad it is, needs to have a fence around it. And I tell you, that fence needs to be a moral code. And I make no apologies about where my moral code is. But we need that moral code. If we only look out for ourselves, one day a strong man stronger than us will come and take away that which we have for himself. When we care for others who are disadvantaged in our community, I tell you, even though it is a sacrificing thing that we may do in caring for them, we are actually helping ourselves and protecting ourselves as well. So even if you have a notion of selfishness within what you do, you need to extend a helping hand to those less well off than you, for that alone will protect you. It's a very important principle of life. But I want you to come from a different angle completely. I want you to care because you should care, not because you want to look after yourself. But it is interesting that the byproduct of caring for the less advantaged, you actually do care for yourself. Many years ago, 2024 years ago, there was a man who walked around Jerusalem and other places who suggested that we should do something very important. We should love one another to the same extent that we love ourselves. Therein lies freedom. Therein lies security. Therein lies meaning for life. I ask you, when you vote in this election, I'm asking you to do one important thing. Think about those people more vulnerable than you and vote for them. Vote for a servant leader, one who is going to do that for you and protect them. Thank you.